大家好，欢迎来到 Blue Rider Art 上海外滩。那这一次呢，我们很荣幸的举办了德国艺术家 Angela Glajcar 他的中国大陆首个展，空间撕裂 Torn Space。那安格拉·格拉萨呢？他曾经在2020年呢，在 Blue Rider Art 台北敦仁做过一次他的亚洲的首个展。那这一次呢，他在中国大陆的首个展 Torn Space 呢，增加了更多新系列的作品。那我们现在就来和他聊聊。Hi, good morning, Angela.
Good morning. Hi, Elsa. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So I'd like to ask you about your earlier career, because I remember you started your artist career as a sculptor, and you use more traditional materials like steel, bronze, and to create your art. But could you let us know when did you started to use paper, such a very unique material, and how do you find paper so interesting?
So when I started to be a sculptor, I worked with wood and steel, heavy materials, and I just built abstract constructions with these traditional materials for sculpture. And at the very beginning, I used paper just for making my drafts for these sculptures. And then I realized that these drafts, this was like small collages in black and white paper. And I was really surprised by the appearance of these collages. And as I couldn't really see a lot for my sculptures, so I had the feeling this is a good idea. I will just follow these first idea of these paper collages and develop these collages as a kind of series without being draft for something else, but being a sculpture for itself. So at the very beginning, these were flat collages, and then everything developed into the space. And I was really surprised that a flat material like paper, which I couldn't believe at the very beginning, can be so three-dimensional, more three-dimensional than steel or wood or anything else. So I fell in love with this material because it gave me a kind of freedom to work in space and for special places. And I just had the feeling this connects much better with my kind of idea of sculpture than the earlier works. So I completely changed. I just had a cut and stopped working in steel and wood and concentrated on paper, because this gave me a three-dimensional freedom, which was a big surprise for me. And it's still a surprise each day.
Yeah, I think since you use paper as a material, you've done a lot of huge sculpture and in public space. And could you share with us how you started so many huge works? Because I think you didn't start with such big scale at first. How you develop it from a small, medium, large, and then huge?
Yeah, so it depends on which kind of series we are talking. My first paper series is Contrarius, and that was a series I started really in a very small scale and then tried to get larger and larger over the time. And the series is in black and white paper, and I just started to make books out of the large installations. So this was the beginning of the idea of Terforation. And you see the first Terforation, the very first Terforation was really a large one. So I just jumped into the cold water. The first one was like 18 meters long. So a very large one. So
Yeah, very
I just
brave.
had no practice in smaller size. I just did it immediately. So that was an adventure, but a big success and another big surprise. So I was really happy to discover all these kind of ways to use the material in a three-dimensional way. And of course, today I'm very interested in working in a smaller scale and larger scale as well, because it's a good combination to think for each scale. You just have to develop a special proportion to think about the material in another way, and this makes me you have to rethink again and again which is the right size, which is the right proportion for this kind of sculpture. So it's interesting to do everything, each scale. Yeah.
So this time in China, it's your first solo show in mainland China, and the name of your solo show is Torn Space, which was assigned by you. And would you like to tell about the idea of torn space? What does it mean, and any concept behind it?
So torn space is, for me, the right explanation to tell something about my work in a very short way, because I'm just tearing the paper. Everything is torn by hand, and when I tear out something, a new space is created. So it's a very simple way of using the material, very pure, and a very easy way to manipulate paper. And it's also, when we're talking about the three-dimensionality, when you tear paper, you open up the structure of the material. When you look at a torn edge, you can see the interior structure of the paper, the layers, the fibers of the material. And a torn edge is very soft in a way. It's not like a cut into a material. Tearing means to open the material in a very soft way, in a very natural way. And that's why I'm using this technique. And of course, you can, when you look at the sculpture, like one here in the back, you have these layers and some light, and then you get a space inside of the sculpture. So we are always talking about the space around a sculpture and then the space inside the sculpture. And this dialogue between outside and inside is something which is really interesting me a lot. So, and torn spaces is everything about space. Yeah.
And you did a solo show in Taipei with us in 2020. This time, after 2 years, you've been created several new series. Would you like to let us know about the new series, and is there any difference for the past 2 years?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So 2 years ago, when I came to Taipei, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and now we are 2 more years, and we know much more about all these kind of things. But very interesting is that I have the feeling my topic of using space and thinking about space is now a really very famous topic, because everybody is talking about space, leaving space, empty space, distance between something, people, now in everybody's mind because of the pandemic. And it's interesting that also because everybody has to stay at home and use the space we live in. So everybody thinking about the space where we live in and how we use it. And I have a lot of requests for healing architecture space, because my work is like an intervention into the architectural structure and can just put something into the space which is missing, some feeling, some poetic, some interior space. So this is something I have the feeling space is now in all over the world in one of the main topics, which is interesting, that I have the feeling that changed really. And the other question about a new series I started last year. So all my series are developed one after another. So most of the time you can see just like a red line from one series to the next one. As I said before, Contrarius was the first paper series, and then I developed, out of Contrarius, I developed the Terforation. And last year I started with a new series which calls Tone Portrait. And in fact, you are the first gallery who has these new pieces in the Solar Show, which I'm really happy that you are the
great.
one. So very good. And so the new series is a combination from my photography, from photos, from documentary photos of torn edges, which I just take photos of my work all the time. So I really love these details of torn edges, and I tear them again and combine them with real new torn edges. So you have like a collage, very flat, but you have an impression that you look into an interior space, which I think is a great thing, because sometimes there's no space to create interior space in a space, but the new series creates these kind of impressions without using a lot of space. And it's a combination of Terforation and the documentary of Terforation and a new composition of all these details to a new series. So that's, I was really happy when I developed the new series last year to find, again, a new way of using this material in a really great way. I hope so.
Yeah, it's interesting because it was only paper. The material itself is quite simple, but eventually it comes out so various outcomes, so different. It was very amazing. And another question is paper itself. Because we touch paper only because we read, we write on paper. Not as artists so sensitive about paper until we saw your works. Wow, that's paper we use every day. So there must be some special, unique about the personality of paper itself. Would you like to share with us?
So yeah, paper is really also very interesting because you have such a big range of different kind of papers. So paper is not like just one paper and that's it. You have a kind of universe of papers. Yeah. If you think most of the time we have just newspaper, very thin and cheap paper, but you have also kind of Rolls-Royce paper. And so there's a big variation of the material. And for me, it's always great to see that I'm always finding new paper. So last year I started to work in Hanji paper, a Korean paper, which I really love, which is completely different from the Western paper. And it's always interesting to see how I can use my thinking about space with a new kind of paper and create a new kind of interior space with these kind of character of the paper. And then we can go back to the new series Torn Portrait, when we're also talking more about different characters, because I think, for example, different papers have different characters, and also the way of tearing the paper can create different characters. And that's why I called the series Torn Portrait, because this can characterize a kind of personality. This can be a person or a kind of characteristic, and that's something which I'm really interested in, and I want to develop quite more in this direction. So I think it's interesting that we get more. We were talking about space and sizes, and now we can more talk about characters of the material in connection with characters of different personalities.
Because you're very special, not only paper, because you use paper, but also you use hands, both hands to tear, not like using brush. You use both hands to tear the shape of the paper, and also the color. You always use quite a purified color, simple color, and the shape of your artwork is maybe flying or hanging or standing alone. And there was a lot of, as you say, different spaces. But talking about tearing and the color, why you consistently so insist on tearing by hand? Because it must be very hard by using tearing all the time, and single color. What's the reason behind it?
Yeah, so tearing all the time is quite hard work sometimes. You're right, but I really love to use my hands. I really love to work physically, to get into a real contact to what I'm doing. And that's also one of the reasons why I really love to work with this pure material in this simple way, because there's nothing in between. There's nothing between me and the paper. I just use it. I just touch it and tear it. So it's a very pure way. So, and you see, I had a discussion with a collector because of black and white. I'm using most of the time white paper. Sometimes I paint it black, but in fact, there's no in between. So everything is black or white, and I use no colors. So we had a discussion, and he said, I feel more gray. So this was a beginning when I thought, so more or less, if you look at one of my sculptures, for example, here in the back, it's a white sculpture, white paper, but you see you have a lot of shadows, and everything creates an own color. So there's no white sheet anymore. So you have these layers, and then you create a lot of shadows and different shades of gray. Funny. And so when you look at pictures of my work, you have these compositions of different gray. And that was one of the reasons I said, when I use photos of these details, I use a gray in different temperatures. So you have a lot of different grays, and I can create something like a personal portrait in different shades of gray. And I like this idea. I don't want to use any color because I think most of the time our world is so colorful. Sometimes it's just good to have a pure view to something which creates or reflects the color of the environmental space. So I don't have the feeling I need a special color for my paper. But of course, it's interesting to use the shadows, which are always there. So all these pieces changed completely because of the light and the shadows, which are on the paper. And that was the beginning when I thought it would be interesting to use the shades of my sculptures to create a new version of characteristics, and that's
we have different feelings when we are in front of the sculpture. Sometimes the sculpture looks like a cave, sometimes it's like a waterfall, or I was wondering, where are the ideas of these art come from, and what do you try to bring into the space?
I would really say that I'm absolutely abstract artist. I have no, if you ask me what's that, I wouldn't tell you it's a cave or it's a landscape or it's something specific. For me, it's open, and I'm always very interested in what people are thinking about what they can see. And it always depends on where they are, where the exhibition is, and what's their own background, where they come from. And sometimes also it depends on the kind of mood, what they have on that special day when they look at a piece of art. And for me, personally, art should be open. So I would like to see something different each day. I don't want to be forced to see something special. I can also change the atmosphere of my piece of art by using different light situations. I think that's something everybody is free to do that. And then you can change you can change your own impressions, and you can see something different each day. That is something which I really love. So I don't have any objective motives, or I would say I'm try to build something which I saw something else. I'm not interested in that, but I'm interested in a kind of idea that when we look at something, what kind of feeling can you just create by people or for the people, the viewer. So when I start to create a sculpture, I have my own impressions, what I can see. Then I start to get an idea what other people can see. And then after all these years, I'm just trying to make compositions that I have the feeling people open up their mind and see a lot of different things. And I think sculpture is a wonderful thing that can make people think in a very free way about our three-dimensional world without any function, without any, you don't have to use it. It's just for you and your brain and your eyes. And that's something which I really keen to do. And I also have the feeling that this is something which is very human. So human beings have these longing to open up the view in a very new way, and to look into something which gives them a kind of idea, and the fantasy can start to work. So this is not connected to a special culture or education or something. This is just human longing, human being longing. And that's like a universal language.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for the interview today. I'm sure the solo show will open up our mind and eyes, and wish us success. Yeah,
Hopefully.
And talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.